In the bustling confines of a transatlantic flight, where the hum of engines drowned out the whispers of unease, a polished CEO named Victor Harlan reclined in his first-class seat, his designer suit a symbol of unearned superiority. His eyes, sharp and judgmental, scanned the cabin with the casual disdain of someone who believed the world revolved around his boardroom conquests. Across the aisle sat a quiet black mother, her presence unassuming, her dark skin glowing softly under the overhead lights as she cradled her young son in her lap. She moved with a gentle grace, her eyes fixed on the window, lost in thoughts that seemed worlds away from the sterile luxury around her. Victor couldn't help but notice her, how her simple clothing contrasted with the opulence of the cabin, how her quiet demeanor seemed out of place among the elite travelers. A smirk curled on his lips as he leaned toward his assistant, murmuring just loud enough for nearby passengers to catch the edge of his condescension. He laughed inwardly at what he perceived as her audacity to share this space, his mind rife with stereotypes that painted her as lesser, an intruder in a domain reserved for those like him. White, wealthy, and wielding power without question. The flight attendants bustled by, serving champagne to Victor while barely glancing her way, reinforcing the invisible barriers that society had etched into every interaction. As the plane ascended into the clouds, a subtle turbulence stirred the air, but it was nothing compared to the storm brewing in Victor's gaze. He chuckled openly now, his laughter a weapon honed by years of unchecked privilege, dismissing her existence as a mere footnote in his narrative of success. Little did he know, this quiet woman harbored a secret that would shatter his illusions, turning the cabin into a theater of revelation. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, hinting at an unforeseen crisis, and in that moment, the threads of fate began to unravel, exposing the fragility of prejudice in the face of truth. The air grew thick with anticipation, each bump in the flight path amplifying the unspoken tensions. What if the very person he ridiculed held the key to survival? Oh, the story was just beginning, a tale of hidden depths and the cost of blind judgment. Victor Harlan had built his empire on the backs of calculated risks and ruthless ambition, rising from a privileged upbringing in the affluent suburbs to helm a multinational corporation that dominated the tech industry. His worldview was shaped by boardrooms where diversity was a buzzword, not a reality, and where subtle biases masqueraded as meritocracy. On this particular flight from New York to London, he was en route to seal a deal that would further cement his legacy, his mind already tallying the profits. The plane, a gleaming Boeing filled with business tycoons and weary families, served as a microcosm of society's divides. First class a fortress of entitlement, economy a reminder of the overlooked. The quiet mother, Aisha Thompson, boarded with a quiet determination, her son Malik asleep against her shoulder. She was no stranger to sidelong glances and whispered assumptions. As a black woman in America, she had navigated spaces where her presence alone sparked discomfort. Dressed in modest attire, a simple blouse and jeans, she chose silence not out of timidity, but from a lifetime of conserving energy for battles worth fighting. Her journey was personal, returning from a conference where she had been honored, though few would guess it from her humble appearance. The flight represented a rare moment of respite, away from the demands of her double life. As the aircraft leveled off, Victor's attention fixated on Aisha. He saw her fumbling with a worn backpack, perhaps containing snacks for her child, and his mind leapt to conclusions rooted in racial tropes. Poverty, lack of sophistication, an outsider who didn't belong. His laughter escaped in short bursts disguised as amusement at a phone call, but directed at her. Nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably, some sharing his bias in silence, others averting their eyes. The cabin's atmosphere thickened, the artificial politeness cracking under the weight of unspoken hierarchies. Aisha felt the weight of his gaze but remained composed, her thoughts drifting to her roots in a small southern town where racism had been overt, not veiled in luxury. She had risen above it through sheer intellect and perseverance, but moments like this reminded her how far society still had to go. The flight progressed smoothly at first, with meals served and lights dimmed, but an undercurrent of curiosity built. Why was she so quiet? What stories did her silence hold? Victor's mockery, though subtle, planted seeds of division, echoing the broader injustices that plagued everyday encounters. As hours ticked by, the plane hit pockets of rough air, jolting passengers from their complacency. Victor gripped his armrest, his confidence wavering for the first time, while Aisha calmly soothed her son. The setup was complete. Two worlds colliding in midair, one built on prejudice, the other on resilience. The stage was set for the rising storm, where curiosity would give way to confrontation, and the true colors of humanity would emerge. The flight's initial tranquility shattered as turbulence intensified, the plane dipping and swaying like a ship in stormy seas. Victor Harlan straightened in his seat, his earlier amusement fading into irritation. He glanced again at Aisha, her composure irking him further. How dare she remain so serene when even he, the master of boardrooms, felt a flicker of unease. His mind raced with justifications for his disdain, drawing from a well of racial biases he rarely acknowledged. She must be used to discomfort, he thought. Her life surely filled with hardships that made this flight seem trivial. His laughter had evolved into quiet scoffing, shared with his assistant in hushed tones that carried just far enough to sting. Aisha, meanwhile, held Malik close, her hand stroking his back in rhythmic reassurance. Her thoughts wandered to the conference she had left behind, where she had presented groundbreaking research on medical equity in underserved communities. As a leading cardiologist, she had dedicated her career to dismantling the systemic barriers that disproportionately affected Black patients, barriers born from the same prejudices Victor embodied. Yet here, in this confined space, she was reduced to a stereotype. The quiet Black mother, invisible until inconvenient. The turbulence escalated, lights flickering as the captain's voice boomed over the speakers, advising passengers to fasten seatbelts. Whispers rippled through the cabin, a mix of anxiety and speculation. Victor turned to his phone, scrolling through emails to distract himself. But his eyes kept darting to Aisha. When Malik stirred and let out a small cry, Victor rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath about disruptions in first class. The injustice simmered subtly at first, a flight attendant prioritizing Victor's request for water while ignoring Aisha's subtle signal for a blanket. It was a microcosm of larger racial dynamics, where service and empathy were doled out unevenly. As the shaking persisted, a passenger in economy collapsed, clutching their chest. Word spread quickly, a medical emergency. The crew rushed about, their faces etched with concern. Victor watched with detached curiosity, his privilege shielding him from true empathy. He assumed the issue would be handled by professionals on board, perhaps some doctor and coach, but the situation worsened. The stricken passenger, an elderly man, gasped for air, his condition deteriorating rapidly. The captain's announcement came next, urgent and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical emergency. If there is a doctor on board, please identify yourself immediately." The cabin fell into a hushed frenzy, eyes scanning rows for a savior. Victor leaned back, smug in his safety, but his gaze landed on Aisha once more. She hesitated for a moment, weighing the exposure against the need, then unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. Murmurs erupted as she made her way to the front, her quiet demeanor transforming into purposeful stride. Victor's smirk faltered. Why her? His mind rejected the possibility, clinging to his biases. She couldn't be qualified. She was just a mother, Black and unassuming. The rising tension gripped the plane, passengers holding their breath as Aisha reached the afflicted man. She assessed him swiftly, her hands steady despite the turbulence, drawing on years of training in high-stakes environments. Victor's discomfort grew as whispers revealed fragments of her expertise. A fellow passenger recognized her from a news article, murmuring about her work in racial health disparities. The injustice deepened. Victor's initial laughter now echoed as a hollow reminder of his ignorance. The plane bucked again, amplifying the stakes. Diversion to the nearest airport was considered, but time was critical. Aisha directed the crew with calm authority, Improvising with limited supplies, her actions a direct counter to the prejudices that had dismissed her. As minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the emotional layers peeled back. Victor grappled with his prejudices, flashes of his own encounters with diversity training surfacing, sessions he had mocked as unnecessary. The rising action built to a fever pitch, the cabin a pressure cooker of revelation. Aisha's efforts stabilized the man temporarily, but the true crisis loomed. The plane's systems flickered, hinting at mechanical issues compounded by the weather. The captain's updates grew dire, blending the medical emergency with flight risks. In this vortex of tension, racial injustice crystallized. Victor's laughter had been more than mockery. It was a symptom of a society that devalued black excellence, assuming it non-existent until proven otherwise. Aisha's resilience shone, her quiet strength a beacon amid chaos. The stakes soared. Would her intervention save lives, or would prejudice cloud judgment further? The air crackled with unspoken questions, each jolt of turbulence mirroring the internal upheavals. The story hurtled toward its peak, where truths long hidden would erupt in dramatic clarity. The plane plunged into its most violent throes, alarms blaring as oxygen masks deployed in a cascade of yellow. Panic swept the cabin like wildfire, passengers gripping seats, prayers mingling with cries. The captain's voice, strained over the intercom, declared an emergency descent. Brace for impact. We're dealing with severe turbulence and a potential system failure. The stricken passenger's condition worsened, his breath shallow, heart faltering under the stress. In this maelstrom, Aisha Thompson became the eye of the storm. Kneeling beside the man, she orchestrated a desperate revival, her hands a blur of precision amid the chaos. The crew, initially skeptical, now deferred to her, fetching defibrillator pads and medications from the onboard kit. Victor Harlan watched from his seat, his face ashen, the laughter long extinguished. His world, built on racial hierarchies, crumbled as he witnessed her command. A black woman, whom he had dismissed as insignificant, now holding the threads of life. The revelation hit like lightning. The captain, coordinating with ground control, broadcast an urgent call for medical expertise. "We have Dr. Aisha Thompson on board," a flight attendant announced, her voice cutting through the din. Murmurs turned to gasps. Dr. Thompson, the renowned cardiologist whose work on racial biases in healthcare had saved countless lives, featured in medical journals and TED Talks. She wasn't just a quiet mother. She was a pioneer, her identity veiled by humility and the prejudices of others. Victor's mind reeled, flashbacks assaulting him, his company's discriminatory hiring practices, the boardroom jokes about diversity hires. The injustice peaked as the plane stabilized momentarily, Aisha successfully restarting the man's heart with a shock from the defibrillator. Cheers erupted, but the danger persisted. The aircraft groaned under pressure, descent accelerating. In that intense nexus, emotional stakes collided. Aisha's son clung to a seat nearby, his wide eyes reflecting the fear she fought to suppress. The captain's final alert sealed the drama. "Dr. Thompson, your guidance is critical. We're landing in 10 minutes." She relayed instructions via the intercom, her voice steady, empowering passengers to assist one another. Victor, humbled to his core, felt the weight of his racism crush him. How many lives had his biases endangered indirectly? The climax thundered to its zenith, the plane touching down in a screech of tires, emergency crews swarming. In that raw, unfiltered moment, prejudice met its match in unyielding truth. As the plane skidded to a halt on the runway, sirens wailing in the distance, the cabin exhaled a collective breath of relief. Paramedics boarded swiftly, taking over from Aisha, who stepped back with quiet poise, her hands trembling only now that the crisis had passed. The elderly passenger, stabilized thanks to her intervention, was wheeled away on a stretcher, his family tearfully thanking her. Passengers applauded, their earlier divisions forgotten in the glow of survival. Victor Harlan remained seated, his suit rumpled, his arrogance stripped bare. He watched as Aisha returned to her son, embracing him tightly, her true identity now an open secret. Whispers filled the air, stories of her advocacy against racial disparities in medicine, her clinics in underserved communities, her battles against systemic injustice. She had inspired policies that addressed biases in healthcare algorithms, ensuring fairer treatment for Black patients. Victor's laughter echoed in his mind as a shameful relic, a catalyst for his awakening. In the aftermath, as passengers disembarked into the terminal, Victor approached Aisha hesitantly. Though no words were exchanged in the heat of reflection, his bowed head spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgment of his folly. The incident rippled outward. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a real-life parable of hidden heroes and the perils of prejudice. Inspired by true events of overlooked Black professionals stepping up in crises, it sparked online discussions about everyday racism in public spaces. Aisha's journey continued, her flight delayed but her resolve strengthened. She returned to her work with renewed vigor, using the experience to fuel talks on empathy and equity. Victor, back in his boardroom, initiated changes, diversity audits, anti-bias training, small steps toward redemption, though the scars of his judgment lingered. The story closes on a powerful note. In a world quick to judge by skin and status, true identity often hides behind veils of silence. Racism thrives in assumptions, but revelation comes when least expected, forcing us to confront our shadows. What if the person you dismiss today is the one who saves tomorrow? Let this tale inspire reflection. Challenge your biases, for in unity lies our greatest strength. Share your thoughts. Have you witnessed or overcome similar injustices?